right, we are live. Okairi, welcome back to my channel, May Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we are back with another episode of Page Chewing, and we are joined today by the Brothers Gwynne, who we are so excited to have on. Unfortunately, Steve couldn't come with us or join us today, but he, will be missed, but PL and I will be holding down the fort. We have finally rescheduled this. Unfortunately, we had to cancel before. So for those of you who are watching on the new date, thank you for shifting with us. And we're excited to chat. But before we really get into the nitty gritty, I would like to give you guys a chance to kind of introduce yourselves. Who are you? What do you do in the book space? And how did you find yourself with us today?
You're good at this bit, Will.
Well, it's wonderful to be on here. Thanks so much for inviting us on. Looking forward to talking about everything to do with books. We'll take any chance to do that, won't we? So yeah, really looking forward to this. So we have a channel called The Brothers Gwynne, which is because we're brothers, so that's a given. And so yeah, we everything to do with books. And we are Papa John Gwynne. Well, we call him Papa John Gwynne, his son. So obviously we've been into reading our entire lives, basically, and a lot of that is down to him. And so yeah, he's giving us that reading gene that we just love talking about it.
Yeah, and if we didn't enjoy reading, we would have been kicked out. So we've had to enjoy it.
There were high stakes.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us on. I'm sorry we had to cancel last week, but here we are. We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry. Things happen. We're human. So we had a comment. I wanted to put this up. Hey, Esme. Esme's here. Hi.
Esme is a reviewer on Goodreads. She's got amazing reviews, so go check them out.
Oh my gosh. And her speed is incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
One day I'll be a cool person like Esme.
Yes. We bow Esme to your.
You'll want to be.
We aspire to be like you one day, Esme.
Yes, right? So one thing that people will find immediately when they look at your channel is how much of a history buff both of you are, and your father as well, from what I understand. Mm-hmm. And as someone who did not pay attention in history as much as I should have in school, I find it really fascinating to see what you guys read and your perspectives on it with that kind of cross-section between fantasy and historical outlooks on things. And as people who actually know what happened in history, how does that affect the way that you read fantasy books in a historical setting? Is it the type of thing where you'll notice a historical inaccuracy and it'll bother you? Or are there situations where that works in the favor of the story? I'm just curious how those two interests intersect in your reading life.
Well, I think if we're reading historical fiction, maybe inaccuracies will irk us a little bit. But in fantasy, I think the wonderful thing about in fantasy is that you can be inspired by anything and then alter it how you want to fit the book. And that's why fantasy is such a broad genre, and one of the reasons I love it, where you can find so much in there. And so inaccuracies don't really, they don't irk me really. But I do love kind of little historical details, because I think one of the things we endeavor to find in a book is that immersive nature to it, don't we? And I think that when you kind of have that maybe historical realism added to the fantasy world, you feel like it could be real. It has dragons, but it could be real. If dragons were alive, then yeah, this could be happening. And so I think that really helps kind of that immersion into a story, and historical details, I think, go a long way to really kind of aid that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Will. I think that immersion is the most important thing for me when I'm reading fantasy or historical fiction. I think fantasy with the kind of historical inspiration is brilliant. Like, look what George R. Martin did with Game of Thrones. He's taken the War of the Roses and just given everyone different names and added a few big wolves, that kind of thing. And it just adds a sense of realism. And, nothing is darker than history. That's what I like to say. And I think if you're going for kind of a dark style of fantasy, then, pinching things from history, probably a good way to go about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think immersion is a really interesting point, because this is something I think PL can also chime in on as well, because I know you have a lot of, your book isn't necessarily historical fantasy. I wouldn't really necessarily call it that. PL can speak for himself, but I know you took a lot of inspiration, as the brothers were saying, from historical points in history, right? Especially for your battle scenes, I think we talked about in the previous chat.
Yeah, and I'm someone who I have a degree in in a medieval literature in English and modern history, and I look to the Brothers Gwynne for some of the best historic recs, because I'm a history nut too, and I'm a historic nut. And you know, some of my favorite authors, Bernard Cornwell, you'll see his books on the top of my shelf. You know, your Papa Gwynns are, you know, all over the place because he's one of my favorite authors as well. But and of course, yeah, Taylor, Taylor and I are huge fans of his work. I love to see all that, and you know, I'm jealous because I
We're
know
all
you have all
twinsies.
the special editions and all that I, you know, I salivate over seeing it. But yeah, what I love about history is, you know, I'm old as you see by the gray beard, and I was brought up on the classics, and you know, especially because of school, you know, and even before that, I was probably a bit of an oddball, reading things like the Iliad at a young age, reading Paradise Lost, you know, reading books that, you know, I know Paradise Lost, big influence on your father's work. And what I love about history specifically, historical fiction specifically, and historical fantasy, which is another subgenre that I find fascinating, is that I like the gaps and the details and the what ifs between. You can look and there are various events recorded in history that we would all agree are accurate, factual. Typically things like dates of birth, dates of death, dates of battles, things like that. And however, everything in between is actually a gray zone because, as we know, history is not always accurate in terms of other aspects, and it's often written from the lens of certain people who have a vested interest in making the history sound a certain way, making certain people be shown in a better light than others, perhaps. And it's that ambiguity and that mystery that I love about history, that you can turn and twist it any way you want to suit a certain narrative. And especially when you have a character, you know, from say a historical fiction book, you know, and I guess you would qualify the Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell. I know, Will, that's the series that you love. That's one of my favorite series of all time. You know, you're dealing with the Arthurian legend, in that you know, these characters may not have ever existed, however they might have, but what were they like? And you know, in the Warlord Chronicles, you get the perspective, the main POV of Durfell, who is a lesser known, I would argue, you know, figure in Arthurian legend, and he gets to tell the story of Arthur from his lens. And one of the things I love most of that book is that, you know, he took something like Lancelot is a villain, right? And for most people, for what they've read of Arthurian legend, Lancelot is the opposite, right? He's this glamorized hero. And I love that ability to blur and mix and max and everything is a mystery, and it's what you make of it. And I love that aspect of historical fiction and historical fantasy. That's one of the things that I love about it. So.
Yeah, it's filling the gaps, isn't it? I think that's what Bernard Cornwell does so well. And he always says that's why he loves history that hasn't got a lot written about it. You know, you've got all these events of, let's say, the Saxon stories. You got a few key dates, few key battles, but he can just fill it in. And he, you know, as long as it fits the story, he's having a great time. We're having a good time as well. You know, I think the only time when I get pulled out of, you know, books is when, you know, if it's history and they've got a sword strapped to their back. It's just silly things like that, which, like, the little details, like you, PL, as well. You love the details, and that's what I love. And it's just like, I think mainly I get pulled out of historical stuff is when I'm watching TV. You know, you might see, because you can just see everything, can't you? You can see all the inaccuracies, and I'm like, no. But I'm getting better in my old age to try and let it go, I think.
Yeah,
there was a time
containing it now where he's just looking down. Just
there was a time where you said, I'm not watching anything for you anymore because you just pick it apart. I'm trying my best. But I'm loving the historical fantasy, the new subgenre of fantasy that's coming around, and there's some really brilliant books out there. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and it's a good time for fantasy at the moment in terms of historical inspiration as well.
Yeah, and there's the saying that history is written by the victors, isn't it? And so you've got that perspective again where you can kind of shift it, and with what Bernard Cornwell did, kind of immersing yourself in kind of the hegemonic values of that time, how different it can be, but how it also resonates. Like, there's a reason, like, the Arthurian legend has been around and loved for a millennium now, and it's because of kind of those core themes that really resonate, despite culture changing so much throughout that time. And I love how that can transfer to fantasy, where people can take aspects from different time periods, different cultures, and really make it an amalgamation and all of that, which is really interesting. And again, as you said, P.L. Stuart, kind of those the what ifs.
Now, just not to put you on a tangent, but as someone who does not know why a sword on the back would be horrendous to see, could you tell us, if there's people in the chat who also don't know, why would that be something that would bother you when you're reading?
I mean, firstly, if you look at, as someone who likes to go to museums and stuff like that, obviously, you know, you get a scabbard from a sword that always found to be worn, you know, on the hip, that kind of thing. I mean, if you have a great big sword on your back, like if you've read the Witcher books, the main character Geralt has two. You know, trying to draw that, unless you have arms as long as a chimpanzee or something, it's just not going to work. So it's just logistics, really. Let's say you're in a pub and, you know, someone pushes you, your back's against the wall, you can't really pull it out, can you? So it's just going to get in the way. Yes. Yeah. Hang on. I've tried it. Yeah. I did try it, and one of my friends had a scabbard made for his back, and I tried to pull it out. It was just very, very tricky. So I was throwing my body all over the place and trying to get to it, but no, it just didn't work. So there you go.
Okay. That's my little
logistics.
Yeah. I mean, something cool, but they're not.
It does look
practical.
Cool. I mean, even Papa Gwynne has swords on the back in his books, but I can't let him off, I guess.
You know, it's funny.
Keep it inside, right?
It's funny you mentioned that very point. Someone you know well, friend of the channel and a friend of mine, I'm honored to, Miles Cameron, a great reenactor who is a master of ancient combat and writing ancient combat. He had mentioned that the other day. I think it was one of his fighting videos, illustrating that, hey, just to your point, Eden, well, if you're going to draw this thing, if you're going to wear a sword on your back and you draw this thing, it actually it would likely have to be two-handed. And as you said, you know, you're in the middle of a pub fight. Okay, like you said, give me a second while I reach back with both of my hands and draw this thing. And hey, I have a character in my books that has a great sword on his back. But he's not typically in those situations, so he usually has the time to draw it because at the back of the fighting. But yeah, it's those little tidbits that I can imagine that, you know, the more you read and the more you become aware of certain things, the more it can become a bugaboo for you when you read something that would be logistically, practically, you know, implausible and or, you know, historically inaccurate in terms of, you know, well, you know, like you said, most people carried swords and scabbards and sheaths on their hip because of ease of the draw. So, but it's just funny. Miles Cameron had mentioned that just the other day and put a video about that on Writing and Fighting. Recommend anyone watch Writing Fighting. Miles Cameron, he does some fantastic stuff. It was in his backyard. He went for a barbecue, and wow, his collection of arms is quite impressive. It's quite impressive.
Yeah,
it's just so fun.
Definitely, yeah. He's got a good collection. His videos are great as well, and it's like little insights like that. I think that will help, you know, lots and lots of authors or even people reading. You know, just kind of gives you a bit more, like a nugget of detail, which, you know, I really like. But it's reenactor people that like to go and try it out, and it's, you know, I love that about them. We've tried some stuff out as well. It's a lot of fun, but yeah.
And then talking about maybe little bits that aren't actually authentic, if you flip it around, there's little bits that are authentic that you find in a fantasy book. Says like maybe the Powder Mage or Age of Madness, which is inspired by elements of the French Revolution. Is I'm reading, then I'll just nod my head. I'm like, yeah, I like that. And then it just increases my love for the series and kind of, again, adds that immersion, which I'm probably going to say like 1,000 times in this chat.
That's totally fine. That is totally fine.
I
wanted to pull up
a recreation as well. We can try that.
Yeah, Chris's request. Yes, would love to see that. I wanted to just pull up a couple comments of people who are with us today. We have Philip Chase with us. We're with him as he's getting ready for work. So thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah, we love
Philip. Amy's here. Good morning from Maine. Just popping in to listen while I get ready for my work day. Lots of people getting ready for work. I guess it's 9 o'clock on the East Coast. Yeah. And then Faye says, I'm at work, so I'm sad I'm missing this. Thanks for popping by anyway. And then our friend JCM Byrne, I'm at work and glad this is distracting me.
Great author in his own right.
This is for,
yeah.
Glad to be of service. Yes. And Anita, hello.
Wonderful blogger.
then we had a couple comments about what we were discussing.
Oh,
So Esme says, talking about historical fiction, I read The Children of Gods and
yes.
Fighting Men after seeing Ed and Will gush about it, and it was absolutely fantastic. Your guys' recs never disappoint.
Oh,
I've
that's
seen
awesome.
that everywhere. Everywhere.
Oh, that is awesome too, because that is a book that we both just fell in love with, didn't
Yeah,
we?
definitely. Have you read that yet, PL?
No, it's my next. I'm currently devoting this month to reading the works of my favorite author, Janie Worth. That's kind of an exclusive thing I'm doing. But that is going to be the first read of March. Is going to be. It's sitting by my bedside. I'm like, I can't wait to get to this. And again, your Rex, watching your videos, and Will, and really got me psyched and stoked for that book. So I absolutely can't wait to read it.
Yeah, it's awesome. If you like Bernard Cornwell, then I think you'll definitely love Children of Gods and Fighting Men. It'll be right up your street.
I'm excited. I'm really excited. Really, and Shauna seemed wonderful. I've been on a couple of lives with her. Seems like such a fabulous person and very, very articulate. And yeah, so I have no doubt that I'm going to be pleased. So
It really seems to be getting a lot of love. I'm seeing it absolutely everywhere in the best way possible. I mean that in the best way possible.
Yeah.
We had a question for Ed. Is it half term in the UK or is Ed bunking off?
It is indeed half term. I wouldn't bunk off. It's not like me.
I mean, would you admit it if you were though?
I wouldn't be allowed. I can neither confirm tonight.
I know your employer tracking you down because
Yeah.
we have video evidence.
Right. It is up here for posterity, so we'll just say absolutely it's half term. Just leave it at that. So this is a bit of a different track, but it is kind of rare that we have other booktubers on here. I don't know if you could tell, kind of got the booktuber shelves myself. So I just wanted to ask a couple booktube-centered questions, if you don't mind, at a couple of them. One of them that I really like to ask other people who make content on the tubes is, how has booktube affected your reading since you started actively making content? Because I know for me, when I was a lurker, I did get, recommendations from booktube and it did affect it in that way. But since I started specifically choosing books to make content on or kind of finding my circle on booktube, it's really shifted what I'm aware of, what I start to read, self-pub being a big one of those from meeting Steve and P.L. So I'm curious for you guys, if you've noticed a shift, and if you have, what have you noticed? What's changed?
Oh yeah, there's most definitely been a change, I think, because obviously in one way your reading time is reduced a bit because obviously editing videos and filming, but on the flip side of that, I think I'm just constantly motivated to read because I'm watching booktube videos, engaging with kind of the community, and just having that TBR pile growing ever taller. And I have to try and conquer it. And so there's the motivation to just carry on reading. And yeah, there's so many more recommendations. So there's always a fresh read. So I feel like I don't really get reading slumps. I haven't for quite a while, quite a few years now, because of that constant motivation and the kind of the range of books that have been presented to me, which if I wasn't on booktube, and I think the same applies for you, Ed, that I wouldn't have picked up many of these books. So yeah, of course, really grateful for that.
Yeah, it was really taking a hit to my bank account, really, all of these recommendations I get from other people. Like, you look at the comments, you watch other videos, and it's just a nightmare. But hey, I love it. I'm definitely here for that. So yeah, I think the way that my readings changed, I think at first I was really tailor picking reads purely for people, I thought, what would people on the channel like to see? I think I'm kind of moving away from that a bit more now. I'm just carry on reading stuff. I read lots of niche stuff, so I don't want to kind of ostracize anyone, but I'm just kind of reading more for me, really. And then if people like it, then, because I recently read a historical fiction series about Boudica, and I didn't think people on the channel, before I even started reading it, I didn't think no one's mentioned it before, so they might not want to read it. But I read it and I was like, fancy fans would absolutely love this. So hopefully it's stuff like that I can then, recommend to other people and get more books out there. But yeah, and I don't remember the last time I binged a series just non-stop, because I remember you and I were chatting the other day, weren't we? And then we were saying before booktube we would read one book of a series and then we'd fall in love with it, and then we would read the whole series without reading anything else. But now I'm making sure I'm always kind of picking something else up in between, just so I'm reading quite a range as well.
And I think also as you said about that binging has changed, but also we try and choose more books that we both read so that we can talk about it on the channel and
Yeah.
things like that, which I find is a lot of fun as well, because of course, if you can talk to people who have also read the book, gone through that experience, and fingers crossed both love it and just kind of praise it, then that is awesome. So yeah, we definitely read more of the same, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's good to have those conversations. I don't know if you found the same, Taylor, but choosing books that you can have conversations with other people is always a big motivation as well.
Oh, 100%. And that balance between books that everyone is reading you can have a conversation about, and then the niche books you'd like to introduce, that's a very interesting balance to strike, I feel. And Esme actually just made a comment about that. I love to go to the Brothers Gwynne channel for more obscure or niche recs. Now it's only a matter of squeezing them into my reading schedule. Yeah. Yes.
As we said, the ever-growing TBR pile.
Yeah, thanks, Esme.
Listen. I can't at this point. My TBR pile is just too big. Physical TBR may still be tackled in the lifetime, but if you include ebooks and audiobooks and everything else that I would like to read, I'm fooling myself. I'm like, there's no way.
But it's better too many than too few, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good problem to have. I was gonna say I'm not going to complain, but here I am complaining. It's a good problem. And the wallet thing is
higher than the ceiling, and it's like, oh dear.
Well, I mean, I think it's when it becomes actually threatening. Like once, for some silly reason, I had a bookshelf directly above my bed, and so I just stacked more and more books on there. And then in the middle of the night, just heard this crashing, and people going on, and they came in, and I was basically just buried under a bunch of books. And people say that's the best. That's the best thing to be buried.
That's a good way to go. Like if that was it, if there was no more, that's a good way to go, I think.
Exactly. I mean, it terrified me in the moment. I thought I was being attacked by something.
I was actually planning your demise, and just each night I was just slowly
loosening,
adding another book to it. Yeah. Do you remember the final book that you put on?
Wow. Yeah, I used to have books above my bed when I was younger. And actually, my mom was like, you got to move those, because she was afraid of that exact thing happening. So good to know it actually can happen.
Well, it's funny, like my bookshelf now, and I know that for me, it's always a case of what I buy and sneak into the house, or what my wife, she looks at the credit card and she's like, oh my God, you bought more books? Oh no, that was a long time ago. No, that
honey.
No, honey, that's
pre-orders.
Pre-orders, yeah. So and now I got this new bookshelf, which is great because you can stack books behind each other in the shelves. So unless you look carefully, you really don't. You put the smaller books below, and people don't really see. And it's one of those things that I think, being addicted to books and reading, there's a lot worse vices out there that someone could potentially have. And yeah,
I say to myself at 3 a.m. when I make my purchases, it could be drugs,
It's a book storage problem. It's not a book buying problem, right? That's the real issue. So
I like
that.
I
always say that book reading and book buying are very different hobbies.
Yeah, absolutely are. Yes.
Yeah. Leo, Patrick Leo, I think Les videos. I haven't watched the full thing yet, but I think he just bought a special edition of a Tad Williams book that was like $175. You can see the guilt, the pleasure, but the guilt in his face that, oh my gosh, I spent $175 on a book I haven't read yet. He hasn't even read Tad Williams yet, and but he's like, I had to have it, and you can see him over the box. It's like, oh, look at this, and that's the feeling a lot of us get, in a variety of ways for getting our favorite books. So.
I've tried to hold back a bit. Where I finally got a Kindle 2 months ago, thinking, all right, I'm going to make sure that I don't pile my room up so much I have to it's like an obstacle course to get anywhere. So a lot forward now, I'm going to buy more books in the Kindle. Then if I love them, I'll buy a physical copy as well, because you just have to do that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Nothing like physical copies. There is nothing like, for me, that feeling of having that tangible book in your hand, and the cover, and flipping through the pages, and just there's nothing like it.
Definitely. And the same applies, I can't really write much on a laptop, or if I'm doing notes or anything, I love a notebook and a pen. It just feels different. It's satisfying.
Definitely agree. I've definitely adopted a similar style of purchasing as well, because living in Japan, shipping is it's another book, essentially, to get any English books here. So I usually do audiobook, or if I could do it through my library. I'm lucky enough to have an American library card, so I can access the American library there. But I always try to experience the work first, and then if I like it, I'll spend money on it. But clearly that, I mean, it only keeps so much from happening. So that was a really interesting point you made, though, about binge reading. And a couple people have commented about it, saying binge reading series is the biggest change for me. I kind of miss it. And we also had Faye saying, I still always binge to the detriment of my channel, which I think is an extremely interesting comment, because I also found that I also stopped binge reading. And I kind of realized it when you just said it just now, where I used to read a whole series and then move on. But it's been a long time since I've read something back to back. And I wonder, obviously, if it's a series on your channel and you're doing a read along, there's a benefit to continuously reading a series. But have you noticed, if you're talking about a sequel or, even the fourth book in the series, is that more difficult to make content about? Do you find less people engage with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think because you want to kind of be open for everyone to watch, don't you? And the further you get into a series, obviously you want to avoid spoilers. And also, if people didn't enjoy book one or they're not interested in it, then it'll kind of dwindle book by book, won't it? And then, so we feel like, I think we still make sure to cover all the books that we really want to talk about, but we might space them out a bit. Like, over a year ago now, we did like a review for each book in the first law, but we just spaced it out a bit. So then it wasn't just like 3 weeks of first law content, and then those who haven't read it wouldn't be able to kind of engage with that. So we do we compromise a bit.
Yeah, and I think if you do a review for each book, you could do it for something that's really popular, like obviously Lord of the Rings. You could review each of those books because it's got such a big fan base. Everyone will get something out of one of those videos, But if you read a new series, like for example, we recorded a video yesterday about the new Richard Swan book coming out, The Tyranny of Faith. And obviously, if we do a review of book 1, then book 2, book 3, not it hasn't got a huge fan base in terms of like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, or George R. R. Martin, that kind of thing. So you're not going to have as many people wanting to watch your video. Might have spoilers, that kind of thing. But I think if we do a review of a first book and then if we love it, then we'll review the whole series. That's probably what we do. I think that's what people like to see anyway.
And it's a bit of experimentation as well, isn't it? Like we'll upload book 1 and then so we'll have a review of Dreaming the Eagle, book 1 of the Boudica series up at some point. And then if people, because quite a few people seem engaged with it, and so we may do one for every single book. But I'd say it doesn't alter our reading as much. We still kind of get to those books, but we just break it up a bit, so it's not binge reading.
Yeah.
Something I really appreciate, using your word, that Papa Gwynne does, is he does the story thus far, doing the Lord's work, putting that in books, truly. Because, I find that if I put a space, between the books, it ends up getting longer than I planned, because then I'm like, oh, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? So that just happened to me with, I loved The Black Coast by Mike Brooks, and I read it last year, and I was so excited. I bought a second book right when it came out. Guess when I'm reading it? Now. So I really appreciate having those stories thus far.
It's funny because Papa Gwynne said he found that bit really tricky to write, didn't he? He didn't know what bits to include, and he was just like, I just don't know what to mention. I might not do it. And then
40,000.
Do it. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's a good idea, because of everyone in the community, everyone wants to read so many different books. It's such a good idea because it sometimes I'll want to reread book 1, but then if I know book 2's got a synopsis at the beginning of what what's been before, then I'll just jump straight into book 2, more likely anyway. So it's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a tricky thing as a writer. I know I've struggled with it personally. Do you write that what's gone before, synopsis, etc.? Tad Williams does a really good job of that in some of his books in his series, at least the ones I've read. Or do you weave somewhat of a recap organically in the pages if you have a long series? I know that's always a struggle, I think, for writers, what to do with that. I opted not to do it for mine personally, but I've seen a lot of really effective recaps. The Lord of the Rings, obviously, I think would be probably one of the best examples of that recap that brings you right back. As soon as you read that, you're right into the action. You know what's going on. You're
Mhm.
flying with the second book. But I do definitely think there's and as a blogger myself, there is that pressure to read as widely as possible. So even if you read a book and it's phenomenally popular, you know, it's amazing, and everyone wants to get to that second book, you tend to, okay, you know what, that was fantastic, but I need to read this series that I have in my TBR. So you've done that book one, you go into book one of the next series, and before you know it, you've read book one of 50 series, and now book two, right? And that in itself can be problematic. So, and I think I think you're right. Unless you're dealing with something that has the massive reach and appeal of a Malazan, you know, a Lord of the Rings, you know, a Farsi or something of that ilk, it is hard to do, you know, back-to-back reviews, you know, unless you're doing, like you said, an immersive deep dive series. I think Taylor mentioned where, you know, you're breaking down, okay, you know, Gardens of the Moon first book, and then you're going to the second book, you know, 2 weeks later, right? Like it is difficult because, and again, for yourself personally, you want to expand your horizons. You want to read all these books, and you know, so many books, so little time. You're trying to fit everything in, and you know, how do you do that, right? So.
I think the person who does the best reviews of book 1, 2, 3 would definitely be, I think, Philip Chase, because Philip Chase, he has such good insights, and they always make me feel like I'm learning something about the book, as even though he doesn't go into spoilers. You know, sometimes he might do a breakdown of the characters. I recently watched his review of The Prince of Nothing, book 1 of that one. And I really enjoyed that after I read the book, because I just felt like you know, he really captures a way of talking about it. So I would definitely watch book, you know, reviews 1, 2, and 3, and it definitely adds to the series. So I think you get booktubers who are just really gifted like that, definitely, and I'll watch them with an insight. But yeah, it's really hard to kind of choose what you're reading as well. As a writer, PL, do you think, are you reading for research as well? Do you read things to kind of inspire you with your writing? Does that help you with your choices, or do you just always just read for pleasure?
You know, it's funny, and Taylor can attest to this. So Taylor and I are both bloggers with the wonderful Before We Go blog. Shout out Beth Tabler, our boss. He's amazing. Also a leader at Grimdark Magazine. And Taylor and I are both assistant editors. And right now we're in the middle of the self-published fantasy blog off run by the incredible Mark Lawrence, as we all know and love. And we're in the finalist judging phase. So for bloggers like Taylor and I, aside from our regular reading that we read for pleasure, and aside from everything else, and you know, you're reading these books for the competition. And for the most part, I mean, you know, Beth is fantastic. You can essentially read what you like, but you have you know, 10 books from a range of 10 books. So you'll pick the ones that seem up your alley and you read them. And I think what I'm finding more and more as a blogger in my blogging life, that I'm reading books that I otherwise would have read, which is fantastic. But I'm reading specifically because I want to blog about them, because the books are well known or popular, or it's an up and coming author that people want to know. Okay, what is this book about? So I want to be able to provide, you know, one of the first, you know, reviews that's out there about it. So I read, I guess if you think about it, a bit less for pleasure than I ever have before. That said, I still, the vast preponderance of my books are still because there's something about this book attracts me. I really want to read it. I read predominantly high fantasy, epic fantasy, historical fiction, sci-fi, things of that nature. So I still read the books that I want to read. I find that, and I'm very drawn to the books with a more classical feel. I read a lot of authors. I read now, of course, and I'm a self-published author. You know, it's funny. Prior to, you know, 10 years ago, prior to becoming an author, I really didn't know a lot about the self-publishing milieu, of which I'm ashamed to say now that I was a self-published author. And of course, you know, my version of finding books was, prior to me going on YouTube, was walking to Chapters Indigo, which is a big major bookstore in Canada, and going to shelves and seeing your dad's books, or you know, seeing Tolkien, and just browsing and pick up a book that way. Now, because of Booktube, because of the proliferation of self-published books, like, it's totally different. And being a blogger, it's totally different. I don't read a lot for research, because I do research. I don't want to say that I don't, but because I'm older and I've read quite a bit now, a lot of my research has come again for the classics, the Lemort Arthurs, the Iliad, the Odyssey, I've been reading for a long time, as you can see, right? And you know, I have been writing for a long time, but you know, I do read books that inspire me as well. I do, you know, some of my favorite authors, your father among them, Jenny Wirtz, Miles Cameron. I those are people I read not just for pleasure, because they make me want to step up my game. They make me want to strive for that continuous improvement that all writers, I believe, that's something that we're driving towards that goalpost. So and I read for the wonder of, I still read for the simple wonder of, like you said, immersion, being taken to that world where I just escape for a few hours and I don't have any troubles, and I'm not thinking about the war in Ukraine or anything else other than, I'm totally focused and into this book, right? And I very much read books. I think that I want to read books that touch me and leave a lasting impression, that are poignant. Especially when it comes to characters. I'm a huge character-based reader. And Taylor knows me well. The three things I'm looking for compelling themes, I'm looking for great characterization, and the prose. The prose has to be there for me. If unfortunately, I read some fantastic books that the storytelling was great in it, but perhaps the prose didn't mesh with me, and unfortunately, you may have lost me a bit. But that doesn't mean the book isn't a good book. It's not a great book. It's just that it didn't quite reach that level for me. So I need prose. I need Tessa Gratton, one of my favorite authors. She writes her. I've read her duology that is essentially a retelling of Shakespeare, with LGBTQ plus characters. That is just, her prose is just. Jenny Wirtz, another writer that the prose is transcended. It's just, your father's prose is just, phenomenal, and just writers that can just totally grab me and pull me in just by virtue of the writing alone. So that's what
that kind of leads into, like, one of the amazing things about reading, isn't it, is that it's subjective, that we don't just get given a list of, oh, here's 50 books everyone will have, and then the journey's done. And that's one of the amazing things, isn't it, that we pick up so many books. Some, they may not click with us, but they may still leave an impression on you. There's many books that I really respect them, and there's bits that I think are absolutely fantastic, but overall it may not be a favorite of mine, but it's still worth kind of that reading experience, isn't it, because of you learn more about what you enjoy, and you kind of get I think I'm now, being a booktuber, I think I'm a lot more thoughtful in what I read. And before I would just wander into Papa Gwynne's library of books, and then I'd like, oh, that one looks cool, I'll pick that out. But now I'm thinking,
I think you mean steal.
Borrow.
Yeah.
We'll say borrow. I mean, they've stayed in my room for 3 years, but we'll say borrowing. And but now I think I'd do a little bit more research, thinking, okay, what are the themes kind of playing into it? Multi-POV, single POV, is it kind of epic, smaller, more intimate, and things like that. And I don't just read one thing, but it depends on, I like to mix it up a bit. And I think that's another way you can kind of avoid reading slumps, is by that variability in reading as well.
Yeah, but I think before I would only read books with swords in. I was like religiously just in love with swords, and I was like, I'm not going to read anything that doesn't have it in. So what's the point? And then last few years I've started reading books without swords in, and they're actually pretty good.
It was a big jump.
Yeah, some pretty good ones out there. So yeah, I'm impressed.
There's a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. I find myself as well being more, you said, thoughtful, and I think that's a very good word, in the way that you approach books, not just as PL was saying with like the Spiff book competition and how you write reviews, but also it's always a subjective experience, but in realizing that objectively something isn't bad, even if it's not for me. So I'm actually in a very interesting space right now with the Queen of Fantasy, Miss Hobb, because thus far might not be for me. But I know. But I can objectively recognize her prose is cozy, it's beautiful, character work is great. We'll see. I actually started to do a vlog because I was so excited to read the Farseer trilogy, and I vlogged my experience with the first two, and I'm debating if that's ever going to see the light of day because I was expecting to be a fangirl from the beginning. And so it's one of those things, again, where it's not a bad product. It's just whether it matches me. So I find that Booktube and talking to people who love Hobb, which is everyone, helps me to kind of appreciate it outside of just my subjective scope. Yeah. So I found that that's a really interesting thing Booktube has done for me.
Yeah, well, I
as
mean,
well.
there was a pain in my heart as you said that, but yeah, I think that's again, as I said before, one of the wonderful things, isn't it? And we'll recommend books to each other, and some we will love, some we won't, but we still think, oh, that was brilliant from it. And like Ed, you're an aspiring writer. Like, there's things that you think that is a writer who he's done brilliant, say with the characters or prose or something like that, and it can be inspiring in that sense, even if you don't love and identify with the book as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's rare that I don't enjoy a book, because I usually try and find something that I enjoy. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you on on Robin Hobb, really, Taylor. But I read book 1 and I really enjoyed it. I think it's a 5-star book. There's some amazing bits about it, but I've just never wanted to carry on the series. So I definitely will at some point, before William start strangling me and things like that.
Yeah, a war is brewing. We'll push that under the carpet for now.
Hey,
we're not completely alone.
Sanderson, Taylor. I mean,
yeah, I
and
know.
Taylor and I are planning to do. She's going to help me. Some of the booktubers who are very, very well read with Sanderson are going to help me get through his books. I've read one. Again, there's so many things that are phenomenal, and so many aspects of his craft are exceptional. However, for me, it's just the prose just left me a bit
Here it is.
wanting, right, Philip? I mean, coming from, I think, I wondered, and there was times when I asked myself, I had to sit down and I want to look objectively at what my issue was. Like, is it that I've read so much, I guess more, I don't want to say books that the language is archaic, but that I've read so many more ancient, older works, and I was brought up a certain way, and my background in terms of school, is that why I find I struggle with prose that I think is not so evocative and immersive. I tried to break down to brass tacks what it was, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's just a thing, it's just a feeling. You can't really articulate what it is. It just doesn't it just doesn't work for you, right? But Brandon Sanderson is a brilliant writer. There's so many aspects of his so many elements as writer, fantastic, but that I know for sure that the prose doesn't grab me, and that's okay though. And we have to forgive ourselves for like Taylor, for not just absolutely loving Robin Hobb as much as someone you respect. Again, loves Robin Hobb. It's just one of those things, and that's also, because I see it from both sides as a writer, right? I see it. I look at my books and people that my books will never click with and never be for them, but they may actually respect or like things about my books and have complimentary things, but it just doesn't work for them, and that's okay, because there's always a book out there for somebody, right? And there's always someone who will love Robin Hobb or will love Brandon Sanderson or will love my books, and it so books always find their audience. They always find the people who really connect with them and really want to read them and love them and want to continue reading books from that writer. So, and the other thing we have to realize too is that writers evolve and their writing styles evolve, and sometimes they write in different genres, and sometimes they write certain books for certain reasons. Specifically, you're writing a book for an anthology that it's different from writing a long series on your own. You're co-authoring a book with someone, so maybe you're trying to write more to their style. There's so many reasons why I think it's important to, especially with writers with big bodies of work, to read as many of their books as possible if you like, so to realize that, well, you may read one of their series like, this isn't the same as this series that I really like, right? But that's okay. That may be part of the writer's natural evolution, or maybe a specific reason why they're writing something very different. So
yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're very lucky that obviously we can talk to Papa Gwynne and ask him all these questions. And he's saying that he feels like his writing's changed a lot since Malice. It was his first book, and he says that he learns every single book, and then he's tried to do something very different with the Bloodsworn, kind of taking different historical inspiration, more of that Norse feel. So he said he does feel like a very different writer,
but it still has that Papa Gwynne style. I think you stick with your style, but you do evolve. And having good prose doesn't mean purple prose, does it? You don't have to be Robin Hobb or Guy Gavriel Kay to have good prose. You can be like Papa Gwynne and be effective and economic. And I've heard lots of people say that Sanderson just doesn't quite have, it just doesn't gel with them. So I don't think you're alone there, PL. I think I've picked up a Brandon Sanderson book once and I put it down, but I'll definitely try again at some point, because everyone seems to love them for the most part, don't they? So, you know, am I missing something? I don't know. But yeah, I don't think you're alone there. But yeah,
because I read The Way of Kings quite a few years ago, but and I remember I really enjoyed it at the time, but I didn't feel that kind of burning need to pick up book 2 straight away. And then it's been 5 years now, and I've not picked up another one. So I definitely do need to. Because as I said, I enjoyed it, but
they're chunky books as well.
they are chunky books.
Yeah, they're chonkers, but also too sometimes, and I think this is something I think perhaps at first you may or may not have struggled with this, and well, I'm not sure, Taylor, same thing I know I have is especially when you're starting blogging, I think sometimes this perhaps this unseen pressure to read certain books, to be able to say that I'm well read in fantasy, for example. You know, for a lot of people means that you've read Erickson, you've read Tolkien, you've read Donaldson, you've read Hobb, you've read Sanderson, you've read Jordan, you've read the names, right? N.K. Jemisin, you pick your writers, but if you haven't read from at least a portion of these books, that perhaps you're not as well read as you know, and that perhaps your pulpit from which to speak about your knowledge of fantasy isn't perhaps as extensive as, you know, someone else. And I think at first, I think that pressure is there for a lot of bloggers. I think it's real, and you know, and it takes time to. And as you have to point out, some of the books are chonkers, right? You know, you're talking about investing, you know, 1,000-page Way of Kings book. You know, if you're not Esme, is probably going to take you a couple of weeks, right? You know, so that's a huge investment of time, and to get through a series like Malazan, which I'm in the middle of reading, middle of reading The Wars of Light and Shadow by Jenny Wirtz, my favorite author, which I love. But again, you know, I'm 5 books in, and those books average about 700, 800 pages in mass market paperback, and they're big. And to be quote unquote well read might take you a few years. You know, but did you either of you? I just want to, you know, ask actually all 3 of you. Did you ever feel a bit of that hey, I haven't read so and so I'm not sure if I can qualify myself as being an authority and you know, and kind of, you know, put that label of well-read blogger in there. Did you ever feel any of that?
Before we answer, I just want to put this up for Esme said, is this where I admit I blasted through it in 5 days?
There you go, Esme. Again.
Not even surprised.
Esme.
Yeah. Exhibit A.
Yeah.
Case in point. Exactly.
Yeah, Esme, you have special powers. I'd like to.
She does.
But
well, you guys can take the question first. Yeah, go ahead.
I definitely felt the pressure at first, especially as kind of, you know, younger readers. And I spent a lot of time, I didn't really start reading properly till I was probably 20, 21. I'd always read Papa Gwynne's books, but nothing else too much really. A bit of Tolkien and that kind of stuff. But especially when I started off, I was like, I haven't, you know, to call myself to be in the fantasy club, I've got to read Wheel of Time, I've got to read Malazan, all this kind of stuff. And there's loads of names I haven't read. I haven't read any Robert Jordan or Sanderson or any of that. But I think now I'm not really too fussed, because I feel like I've read quite a lot of books in fantasy. I know where it's going now. I've read quite a diverse list, really. So I think as long as, you know, I feel like I've read lots of David Gemmell. He's my favorite kind of classic fantasy author. And I read a lot as a kid, Lloyd Alexander. So I feel like I'm comfortable with that kind of stuff, with my knowledge that I know about those. But what about you, Will?
Yeah, well, I think so I've studied English and history at college, and I'm going on to at uni. So I think I did feel a bit of pressure in that sense to maybe read a bit less fantasy, but then in the Booktube community, read fantasy. And I think I was making kind of lists thinking, I need to read this, and this. But luckily, I think I gave myself a bit of a slap on the wrist, and I was like, I need to read what I think I'll love. For whatever reason that may be. And I think there are times where people are like, oh, have you read Mistborn or the entirety of Stormlight Archive? And I'm like, have like my head drops. I'm ashamed with myself. But
but I read Robin Hobb 7 times.
But then you can turn it into something of, no, but I'm looking forward to read that. And it's impossible to read every single book that's out there. But it's definitely like, I think it's like a reading goal, isn't it? Of one day I want to have read these mega series like Malazan, Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, Realm of the Eldlings, all of them. But it's kind of just looking forward to having that fuller fantasy picture.
Yeah, I think I have quite a similar end point to what you guys mentioned, where I've kind of made it a long-term goal to read a lot of those, especially classic fantasy. That's something I'm actually starting on my channel this year. I think I kind of read in the same way that P.L. mentioned before. I would go to the bookstore and pick up a book. So I wasn't really reading stuff before my time. So classic fantasy, there's kind of a big gap there where I haven't read quite, like I haven't even picked up Gemmel before. So there's a lot that I know. So there's a lot of holes that I would like to fill. But I would say that my main pressure that I felt was actually being a woman who likes fantasy. Because let me tell you, if you say you like fantasy, the gatekeeping comes very quickly if you're a woman. So it depends on the space that you're in. And I'm very happy to say that in general, the Booktube space that I'm in is not like that. But go to Reddit, go to a bunch of these other places, and you really have to prove your mettle. You know, God forbid I haven't read Martin. And that is often something that was, how dare you, you know? So I think that I was feeling that pressure when I was in those spaces. But now that I've kind of shifted and found like a better space for myself, I don't feel that external pressure anymore, which has really helped. But yeah, I think I've turned it more into a long-term goal that I would like to eventually.
No one should feel pressure, should they? Because reading is, you know, you've got to read things that you want to read. So there's no, so they're stupid. Screw Reddit.
Yeah. Yes, I think most people are realize that that's a dumb thing to do, but the ones who don't are loud. That's basically they always are.
And the return to that point is that reading's subjective, and it's not like a list of you have to have read this and this. And so because it's subjective, because this series is kind of widely loved, I mean, maybe in some ways it gives more reason to read it because maybe it clicks for more people, but it doesn't mean that that's the thing you should read. There are so many other books out there which deserve attention, don't they? And it's about what draws you, what are you, sometimes it's kind of that inexplicable feeling, isn't it? A bit like what you're saying about the prose, PL, where it just clicks with you. You don't know why. And it's the same with the book as a whole, isn't it? And yeah, when you're just drawn to it, that's what you should read.
Yeah, you gotta wait till when you're ready. Because I tried to read Malazan, I definitely wasn't ready, but I think I'm nearly ready. So you know, and like we do a book on historical fiction, and there will get lots of people say, "Oh, but you haven't read, you know, War and Peace or that kind of thing." And I'm like, yeah, I'm not ready. I'll read it one day, or I might not. That's okay. So we'll see. Yeah.
Taylor,
I was going to say, just kind of a continuation from this topic is a previous comment that that Esme had put up, which was, that was me for the longest time about Hob. And then while Live Ships was amazing for me, it wasn't until the very final trilogy that I actually really got the hype. And what stuck out to this comment, in this comment for me, and I want to put to you guys, all three of you, is how much grace will you give a big series that isn't working for you in the beginning? Because we talk about it being subjective, or we want to take our time with series, like we just said. But we also mentioned it's a commitment. You know, Sanderson is a commitment to read the whole Cosmere. And if it's not working for you, how much grace, how many books do you generally give to a series like that? Like for me, for Hob, I know I'm going to do Farseer. And then Live Ships is the one that really calls to me. So I'm at least going to do the first book, the first one of Live Ships. So that's 4 books into a world before I'm willing to say not for me. I usually do at least more than 2. But I'm curious for you guys. I have friends who are like, no, after 1 book, that's it. It's just not for me. And that's just their style. So what's your guys's, how do you do that?
I think it fluctuates. I think it depends on kind of what you know about the book. And say with book 1, that if there's certain things that don't click with you, do you know, is that going to carry on with every single book is this in the series? What do people say? Because there's a few series that people say, push through book 1. I prefer book 2 and 3 and 4, and so on. I could have just said every number there.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, maybe 9, 10, add a push. But I think it's about kind of that gut feeling in a sense, but I always try to at least give at least 2 books before making kind of a judgment. There's a few series where I've read book 1, it hasn't clicked, and I intend to read more, but I've not got to it yet. But it's definitely one that it's waiting for me in the peripheral. So it's not one that I've discarded. I definitely try and give it a chance.
Yeah, I actually think I will probably read them all, really. I mean, I know I'm not above, you know, hate reading or anything like that. I really didn't like the Witcher series, but I just had to finish it. I read 2 books and I was like, I'm just gonna have to finish it. Lots of people say there's something I can get from this, so I definitely will. And I think I might not read it all, in the next 6 months, but I'll definitely read it all at some point. And sometimes I know that people say when they read Malice, book 1 of the Faith and the Fallen, sometimes that didn't click with them when they read Valor and they fell in love with it. So I'm hoping that will always happen in the future. So I'll always give a series the benefit of the doubt and just keep plowing through. And I'm sure at some point it will click with me.
Especially if there's aspects that you really did enjoy and respect in book 1. That you think, or maybe if that was a bit weaker, maybe that is different in book 2, but it retains those elements that you love.
I totally agree. I'm finding though as well, and my and frankly, becoming a writer has changed this, in that I look at myself and I say, would I want someone to give up on my series after one book when I'm writing a 7-book series? And I think for a longer series, there's a direct correlation to like this series and how much for me personally I'm willing to give some latitude in terms of if it's a 7-book series, well, I think it's almost unfair to bail after book 1 when that, and especially if you hear as Will said that it gets stronger with each book. Okay, well, if there were things I liked, as you pointed out in book 1, and I've heard from the vast majority of people say that book 2 and 3 it's better. I think one series like that I haven't read yet is Dresden Files. Everybody. I've heard a lot of people say that, if you Dresden Files, you have to get to book 9 or 10 or something like that until it really takes off. Well, for a lot of people, they're not going to read 9 or 10 books of a series before they pull the plug. But however, again, this is Butcher is a fantastic author right here, and so I feel that I would think that I kind of have a 3-book limit if I'm reading a book, especially if it's a longer series. Maybe not so much trilogy, because if it's only a trilogy and you've read 2 books and they don't really click with you, will you be in for the 3rd book? I'm not sure, but I think with a longer series, they're becoming fewer and far between. I think longer fantasy series. I think I'm one of the crazy people right now is actually still writing a long one, but maybe it's part of the whole backlash to GRM and series not being finishing and Rothfuss and things like that, but I think for me, if the series is a longer series, I'll give it, at least 3 books. If it's a trilogy, I'll certainly get through the 1st book and probably try the 2nd until I make a decision that it's not for me.
That's pretty solid. This is such a fantasy problem. Like, if you talk to any other genre, they're gonna be like 3 1,000-page books. Absolutely not. So.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at a series, if you look at other speculative fiction works, especially like a mystery thriller, if you look at the Jack Reacher books, right? I mean, if people buy those books because they love predominantly because they love the main character, so the main character is just they could read 50 books of Jack Reacher, even though it's somewhat formulaic, he's gonna make it. Maybe some characters you love may or may not die. It's pretty well tried and true. We know what's going to happen. He's going to beat some people up. He might, get captured, but he's going to triumph. But people will read 30, 40 Jack Reacher books and love them. So I know in fantasy we don't quite have the same rope. But yeah, I think there is a possibility to read a first book, not perhaps love everything, but see enough to intrigue you, to keep you, okay, you know what, I'm gonna give this a chance. And then if the 2nd book clicks, boom, you're hooked, right? So,
yeah. And I don't feel I give more leeway with a bigger series, because it's strange, even though series overall perhaps becoming smaller, duologies and trilogies are being pushed a lot now. If you look at most of the mega series like Malazan, Wheel Time, Realm of the Eldlings, they George R. R. Martin, of course, as well. There's so many books, and I think alleged that is, I'm going to say it again, immersion, where the more there is in a world and the books and the characters, the more you can immerse yourself in it. And so there is that potential with a longer series for it to become like a favorite ever. And so, I think I definitely give more leeway to longer series because of that kind of potential behind there as well.
Just want to say, our friend Tiago's here.
Tiago.
Hi, Tiago.
Thank you, Tiago. Current SBFBO finalist with A Touch of Light.
Yes.
Good luck, Tiago. So I haven't read Tiago's books yet. Just one of those books very much on my TBR that I haven't gotten to, and probably will be after the contest for various reasons because I'm a judge. But there's another example book that excuse me, want to get to, but just haven't got there yet.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, I see rave reviews about that on Goodreads and Twitter.
It's good stuff.
Yeah,
it is.
exactly.
It's very good stuff.
Yeah,
I can't
he's a
say
great
more
guy.
because I am officially on the on Teams, but it's good stuff. I can say that.
And he's a phenomenal guy. Thiago's a great guy, so I can definitely say that.
We had a couple comments on our previous discussion. Unless I completely hate book one, it's rare I'll completely give up on a series and not read at least 2 books. Then we also had a Dresden comment or 2. Dresden is difficult to recommend for that reason. I enjoyed the books up to 12, but from then on the books are dynamite. Look, listen, 12 is a high number. I gotta say, Chris, you're asking for a big commitment there. 12 books. And we have P.L. I can't believe you just spoiled the entire Jack Reacher series for me. How dare.
But I did want to ask the brothers. Obviously, your father is quite a well-known, popular, beloved writer. But how, and perhaps we understand some of the genesis, but how exactly did you wind up being, getting to Booktube and becoming such popular booktubers? Like, what were the seeds that germinated to make the Brothers Gwynne? Like how did it all get going?
Being forced to sit down at 7 a.m. read a book by 10. No, that's not really how it was. But for me, when I was younger, I was like a very maths person and I didn't really read at all. And then when I was, I think 8 or 9, then Papa Gwynne got his first book deal. And then I think I'm quite weird because I just kind of turned a switch and then I was reading every single day of the week for the next 13 years.
That's not weird, Will. That's good. Like that.
So yeah, it was weird how it was kind of a switch. And Papa Gwynne, we've obviously talked about his characters over the dinner table for so many years, and so
they weren't really
real.
They weren't really books to us. It was like friends. We always had, Dad always wanted to ask us about what we liked about this book, or we'd talk about the characters just all the time, more than probably is healthy, really, because they do feel very real to us. And when we wanted to do Booktube, we watched a discussion about Malice, Faith in the Fallen, with Philip and Patrick and a few other booktubers, and I just loved watching it so much. I was like, I would love to do something like that and just talk about Dad's books. And I kept asking you, didn't I? I said, can we record some videos? And eventually you caved.
I caved in,
and here we are.
Wow, that's a phenomenal story. What did you find it? And because your some of your examples, you're talking about Patrick, Philip Chase, obviously extremely beloved, very well respected booktubers. What was it coming on Booktube for the first time? You don't have any followers really yet. You're kind of shunning at the void. It's like, hey, we're here. Like what was that whole the growing phase like?
It was definitely nepotism, really, wasn't it? It was because of Dad. We used his name. I always say if I ever had a book and I was published, I would write Edward on the front cover, really, really in really small letters, and write John Gwynne in like huge letters. So maybe Stephen King's son should have done that, but I don't know. But yeah, so that's what I would do. And yeah, it was definitely that sparked it, wasn't it?
But then also when we watch our first videos, I mean, I'm cringing. I'm like, we're so bad. Obviously, you weren't used to the camera. It's so kind of like, I enjoy.
You're not alone. Oh man.
Yeah,
it's tough watching.
Learning.
I think we were so lucky with we got quite a few subscribers just from the first week, really, and that was just because Dad shared it on Twitter and lots of people knew we'd talked to people on Twitter, and I think that's why. And then I presume that we've grown because we like to read lots of different books. Lots of people say we like historical fiction and that kind of stuff. So, and there's not many historical fiction booktubers out there, really. So maybe it's because we got a big mix, and I think us being brothers plays into it. I like to tease you a lot, and
we can cheat where we can talk about double the books. Yeah, because there's 2 of us. So it is cheating, but
that actually is a question that I had for you guys originally was, is there any, well, of course, benefit, but also maybe hidden difficulty of having a tag team as, a Booktube channel? Because I imagine there's a lot to negotiate, or, you guys seem to flow very naturally back and forth in a video. So I imagine you don't have to script it exactly, but Are there any hidden difficulties with having two people manage?
Whenever we fight, we have to cut that off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always win, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah. But no, it's not really too
No.
many difficulties. I mean, the problem is because Will wants to read so many different books, I want to read so many different books. Sometimes we don't get a chance to talk about the same books, and that's what we're going to do more of that this year. Is what we said, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the main issue is actually scheduling, because Ed's very busy, I'm busy, and it's often the times where we're both free. It can be hard to kind of fit that into the same time, and that's why I've also got a side channel where I'll talk about books that Ed's
took
not
you an
read.
hour to mention. That's pretty good. You usually mention the first 2 minutes,
but it's because
shout it out. Let us know.
And the name isn't as creative as the Brothers Gwynne. It's just William Gwynne. So yeah, I kind of gave up on that. But yeah, that is because of the scheduling where I have a bit more free time.
Fault you branched off.
The blame is completely on it. But it's because of I have a bit more free time, so then I'll do extra videos then. But then we make sure to kind of, if we've both read a book, the Brothers Gwynne is the priority, and we put stuff on there.
Yes, it is.
And we're trying to read more of the same books together, aren't we? Or recommend some books that the other brother must.
Or if I tell you to read a book and you read it and you don't love it with your whole being, then I'm really upset for a few days.
You take it quite personally, actually.
Well, they're my friends. Well,
yeah.
Okay.
Ed just shakes his head at me. You just see the sadness, and then
this face comes back, right? You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and congratulations on the new channel. That was something I was gonna actually ask you about, but you beat me to it. So, but yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Congratulations. No, not Taylor. You didn't scoop me. The man himself talked about his own channel, so that's a good thing. But I was also going to mention congratulations, I believe, to both of you, because if I'm not mistaken, I don't think I'm speaking of turn here, because I think you both mentioned it on your channels, that both of you are planning to enter the writing sphere yourselves, that you're both working on some.
You scooped me, P.L.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, it's okay. Forgive me.
How dare? Well, I actually was inspired earlier,
and then now this.
Because Philip had left this comment way earlier in our discussion, which is that you're fellow booktubers and excellent ones at that, but you're also writers. So spill the tea. What's going on?
Do you want to kick off first, because you're a lot further ahead in kind of
that
journey?
So I'm in the middle of writing just a fantasy standalone at the moment, and I've always liked writing. I've written quite a few short stories and things like that, but and this is my kind of big serious effort, really. I've written a load of rubbish which I would hate to read now,
but it's to learn from, isn't it?
Yeah, and Papa Gwynne will sit down with me and we'll go through the chapters and do a bit of editing, and he helps out a lot, so it's a lot of fun. It's kind of a Native American inspired fantasy. I love, if anyone watches our channel, then my channel. Oh, that's a bit rude. They'll know that I love reading about Western books and Native American tribes and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a big influence. And just in the middle of writing, I've done about 60,000 words, just editing it now. So, and then I'll carry on. But yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, and you love it, don't you?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. What are you writing?
Well, I think I've written quite a lot of short stories as I've kind of grown up, entered a few competitions, and I've just really enjoyed it, really. And so I've got pads that I think when I was about 10 or 11, I wrote 40,000 words of a book. And then when I handed it to Papa Gwynne and Ed, they're like, this is Malice, but with different names.
Yeah.
So I was obviously so inspired by Papa Gwynne. I'd basically written the same story, but different names.
He was like, this is pretty good.
That's so cute. Familiar, but good.
I wrote that. I think I wrote Aragon, the first few chapters of that. Dad, and I must have been like 8 or 7 or 8. And Dad was like, I've got genius on my hands here. He can write. And then he saw Aragon next to the computer. So,
your cover was blown.
Yeah, exactly. But no, we really enjoy writing. I think it's kind of a byproduct of being in Papa Gwynne's house. He's always talking about how much he enjoys writing, and we love to read, and we'd just love to write our own stories that people would enjoy. So hopefully one day.
Yeah, definitely. It's an aspiration.
Yeah.
Well, I would actually like to throw a question at you. I think that you asked PL earlier, which is, as writers or aspiring writers, are there particular books that you read for to help you with your historical accuracies, or that just inspire you? Like PL mentioned, a couple authors that make him want to be better. Are there certain series or authors who stick out for you as inspirations in the writing sphere?
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends often on kind of what you're aiming for, kind of like single POV, multi POV, what kind of themes are you combating with, and that can kind of really come into play. And when I'm in kind of that writing mode of I want to write every second of the day, I gravitate towards those books that it's a hard line, because I remember Papa Gwynne saying that it's hard reading whilst you're writing, because if you love a book, you might try and mimic that exact style, and then you realize you've just written Game of Thrones, basically, but not as good. But so it is hard in that kind of balance. I think more when I'm in that writing phase, I try and read non-fiction, more kind of research, because yes, we love some historical fiction, those historical details, and I'm so boring, but immersion. So yeah, that's kind of what we strive for. And as I said earlier, Ed's a lot further in kind of that writing process than I am.
Yeah, I think the books I just read anything really, and I'm in the habit of making notes on everything I read. You know, just I might write down a line I really enjoyed, or when I read Joe Abercrombie, I'll probably be writing chapters that I really enjoyed, because I love the way that he writes his prose, the way he manages to find a voice just in a couple of words, and the humor he gets in his writing is definitely something I aspire to be inspired by, which is cool. So yeah, and I think as a history buff, I want to read as much non-fiction or even historical fiction as I can set in that period. So it's all in the details for me. And I remember when I started writing, Dad was like, "You've just written a book on how you make a sword. Basically, you don't need that much detail in that kind of stuff." And I was like, just trying to learn, So yeah, it's just reading stuff that inspires you. And if you have a historical inspiration, that really gets me into the mindset. I think if I read, non-fiction, or even just watching TV, really something I've been watching lately is a program called The English. It was on BBC, and that is very much similar to what I was going for in my book. So it's amazing to see that, and I've watched it a couple of times now, and I just love watching it because of the themes it tackles and the kind of similarities that I would hope to go for, because it's just brilliant. So yeah, things like that, just try and engorge on as much as you can, really.
Yeah. I have so much respect for people who decide to put works out there, because as an avid reader, I think I have been thoroughly. I didn't have an interest in being an author, but even if I did, I would be thoroughly intimidated at this point into not putting my work out there, because I'm like, there's so much good stuff, So I have so much respect for people who decide to put it out there. I know it takes work and practice and draft after draft after draft. So, but I'm not the only one excited. We've got a couple people saying excited to see your work.
Thank you,
Hope
Andrew.
your humor comes through in your writing.
So do I. Thank you.
And the more Gwynne writing out there in the world, the happier I'll be.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Legend.
Yeah.
One day,
hopefully. Yeah. And I remember Papa Gwynne saying when he started writing, he sat down and he thought, what do I love to read? What do I love to be in a book? And one of the things was kind of the key theme of friendship and belonging. And so he said that that's why he put it in his book, because you want to write something that you're passionate about, and that includes the kind of the themes and ideas and inspirations that you've had through your kind of reading career or hobby.
Well,
yeah, something that Ken Liu said, we had an interview with Ken Liu on here, and it stuck with me to this day, is that I'm paraphrasing probably what he said, because he probably said it in a better way, but basically every author leaves a ghost of themselves in the book that they write, which I think is just such a beautiful way to put that sentiment, because everything that you've experienced, your interests, your joys, they do seep into the work, I think, in a way, whether you mean for them to or not.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think you could write a book without, putting your everything into it. So, it does become part of you. I know that when Papa Gwynne talks about the books he's written, it does feel like they're a part of him, and he's tackling this theme, which is really important to him, or that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely a big deal to authors as well. And I'm sure you can relate as well, PL, the books that you write, you're putting everything that you can into that, and everything is a part of you as well. So
yeah. And especially when it's not a short process, is it? It's not like, it's done in a week. It must take everything that you love, and you try and put it into your books, and obviously that is a beautiful quote of you leave a ghost for yourselves.
Yeah.
And I love that.
And Ken Liu's a great writer as well.
Yeah.
I am such a fangirl. When we had him on here, so much control was necessary for that interview.
I was
He's
so mad. I was so upset I
phenomenal.
missed that one. I haven't read his books. I have them all on my shelves. I have to get to them still. But and his intellect just, oh my gosh, just mind-boggling.
The Dandelion Dynasty is incredible. Have you, gentlemen, read the Dandelion Dynasty yet, or is that not?
No, yeah, I've read the Paper Menagerie. Yeah, so I'll get to read that soon. But I love the Paper Menagerie and that his short stories.
And I've got the Dandelion Dynasty just out of camera shot there, waiting for me.
Yeah,
I'm excited to hear your thoughts when you get to it.
And Taylor, going back to your thought on saying that author, it will be quite intimidating to release a book because of all the, there's so much good stuff out there. You couldn't help comparing yourself. I like to read Joe Abercrombie's blog, and he always writes in it. He goes, I've read what I've written so far, and I hate every single word. I suck. I'm rubbish. And then he still publishes it, and it's a great book. So I think every author goes through that at some point.
Yeah.
Well,
personally, I know we all can't wait to read your books. And like I'm so excited to know that you two are working on books now, and frankly, because you're still young, you're going to have long writing careers ahead of you. So that's a cause for celebration. That the Gwynne name is going to be reaching and expanding in all sorts of different places. I know that one of the things that absolutely makes your father one of my favorite writers is the characters. I mean, there's so many great things about his books, but I mean, I'm still traumatized over Hunger of the Gods. Like, I still can't, and I'm still hopeful. Okay, maybe what I read at the end wasn't really end. I know you can't spoil it, but I'm just like, I sat there holding my head for oh my god, right?
Pretty weird.
And I know that we talked about this earlier briefly. I said Taylor knows me well. Characters, prose, and compelling themes. What is it for you? If you could pick one aspect of a book, and what is it for you that you think really is the hook? Whether you're reading, Dan Brown historical fiction, whether you're reading, fantasy, what is it what's that element that it kind of a must to be there for you to really, really get that enjoyment out of maximum enjoyment out of a book?
Well, I think after joining there, it's the characters, because if I love a cast of characters or just a single character, I could read a book of them just like making tea all day and just eating biscuits, and that is the hook, because you're in their minds and following their life. And I think that is, whilst it may not be integral to every single book, some authors may focus on other things. I think that is something where if the character works there, I'm in, no matter anything else that's going in the story. You can forgive other things. But the characters are really the hook for me. And I think that's also the thing that when I reflect on books that I've read, I initially think of the characters first and foremost. And so it's even more important in that sense as well, of kind of how I look back on those reads years past. And so, yeah, characters definitely, I'd say, are the main thing.
Yeah, characters stick out the most. And after reading, grimdark fantasy, I'm realizing that I don't have to love a character to really want to read that series. As long as someone's got a new voice, something to add to the genre, there's a bit of intrigue there that, or fascination. Like, no one really likes Glockter, but you can't help but be behind.
I love Glockter. Yeah.
And, for reasons you do actually love him as a character. He's genius, and it's people like that, characters like that, which, I really love. So when I read, that's what I definitely look for.
Yeah, because there's not very many happy books out there.
No.
So we kind of subject ourselves to torture and trauma, don't we, in reading these books? But it's about following those characters. And a lot of them is loving to hate them, isn't it?
Yeah. Is it
yes,
the same for you,
or
Taylor?
loving that they challenge you. Yes, yeah. I'm unashamedly a character-based reader. You'll hear me say it in pretty much every review. So mentioning that, I think, is helpful, because if someone else isn't a character-based reader, then maybe they'll realize maybe this book isn't for them. Just, Abercrombie is one that before I even picked up The Blade itself, everyone was like, that book is plotware. So just be ready for it. It does not exist. It's characters. So knowing that really helps, especially if you're a character-based reader. But I also really like when characters challenge me. P.L.'s book, it's from a first-person perspective from a very unlikable character. Yeah, and you're definitely not supposed to feel for him in the beginning, right? And he works with those themes a lot. So I think that I agree completely with you guys that it doesn't have to be a likable character, but it has to be a character that grips you, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, with characters, often looking at kind of the human condition, isn't it? What drives us, what motivates us, and perspective as well. And sometimes it's really interesting to follow a character who they can be abominable and they can have very different perspectives. And so I've read A Clockwork Orange, Anthony Burgess, and so I think the main character inspired Jorg in
Yes, Broken Empire. Yes.
Yeah, and so you hate him, but he's so charismatic that he is entertaining. It feels like horrible to say, but entertaining to follow, and it makes it a book that just stands out in the memory because the character's so vivid and real and like so horribly so.
Yeah, I have to agree. Jorg is a character that, I mean, he's a psychopath, right? For all intents and purposes, but you can't look away from, and he is so charismatic, and he's also, tortured, the trauma he's gone through, that, in some ways there always will be that empathy for him, because a bit of, as his background gets revealed, and I think that's a masterclass work when you can write a character that is unlikable. And I'm no Mark Lawrence, but I'm just saying, when you can write a character that's unlikable, but people are still drawn to them, and that they just can't help keep reading, if nothing else, to see the train wreck, right? You know what I mean? Like, you can't look away. But I think that is a real gift of writers to do that. And one thing I love, for example, about your father's work, especially the Bloodsworn, is that he has quite a few POV characters. One of them is unlikable, funny as hell. Really the comic relief, I think, especially in the second in Hunger of the Gods. But you end up caring about them. Like, you don't want them to die, because you want to keep amusing you, and you want to see just how despicable he would be, just how cowardly will he be. Like those are all things that I think, and that's a gift, that's a skill of a writer, in writing a character that isn't necessarily one that you're going to root for, or right, because they're so noble and gracious and lovely, but they're interesting enough that you really want to keep reading. That's definitely something that your father established in, I feel, with Buzzword Switching, and then in his previous trilogies. I mean, John Gwynne is one of those writers where he will just wreck you and ruin you and leave you a puddle of ooze, on the table after some of his characters. Some of those character deaths, I still think I'll never stop thinking about them. Right? He's done everything from turn, friends to lovers to enemies, to like the things that he's done are just makes him an iconic writer, and definitely So he's characters is characters, and
the POV you're talking about in Hunger of the Gods. And we learned early on in Papa Gwynne's career, so he'd written Malice, and he sat down, he was going to write Valor, and he said, who are your favourite characters? And we said our favourite characters, and then a few months later he gave us Valor, and those characters died at the end of Valor. And we're like, what? We thought you would keep them safe for us. And so every book since then, when he's asked us, we've thought, who do we want to die?
So we just
right.
And then he's kind of caught on. So now he's like, I don't think they're being honest with me. So we've learned to be guarded with our favorite characters now. But I think it links back to being character driven, isn't it? About when you feel that attachment, even when you hate the characters, you're still attached to them because they're engaging to follow. And often you don't realize that until they're put in danger. And when a writer can make their characters, when you feel, they could actually die here, that is a thing where it provokes so much emotion, even for characters you really don't like. I mean, I hadn't watched or read A Song of Ice and Fire until mid last year, and so I've watched season 1 and 2, and I've read 3 of the books now. And one of the things is there's not very many nice people in A Song of Ice and Fire, but there's
not even a little bit.
exactly. But there's so many characters that you want to survive and carry on through the books because they are so engaging to follow, and perspectives, even if you just completely disagree with their rationality and their decisions, they're still just so entertaining to kind of engage with.
Yeah, but it's
Yes.
wonderful when you have the John Gwynns and the GRMs who have zero compunction in eliminating your favorite character. It's just that like you said, that feeling of total insecurity that who you love may die in the next chapter and you don't know, right? And I think that in itself, it really builds tension and makes books really special when no one is safe, and it's very much like real life, especially as I mean, in anything that's analogous to a medieval context where I always draw the similarities, which I'm sure I haven't even read that far into the background work in the in terms of the War of the Roses, in terms of what the direct characters that Martin. I assume that Ed Stark was somewhat analogous to Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, especially in terms of his arc. But like it's when that character, the character that you love may not make it to the next chapter. It just makes the book that much more, the special, right? So, and I'm hopeful, based on everything that we're learning about you, that your works will be equally character driven and give us that sense of fall in love with characters that we will cry if and when they don't make it through the next chapter. So we're
We'll
really
definitely
excited
try our
about
best to make people cry.
Papa Gwynne does call me very Disney, so maybe it'll have a happy ending. Who knows?
Well, it's a perfect time to put Tiago's comment up, which is no one wants to read about happiness.
Exactly.
He said he wants to read books where people don't die. You want the tension to be high, the stakes to be high. So without that, so yeah.
I think it links a bit. We were talking a lot about kind of historical inspiration earlier, weren't we? And it links back when you look at historical events and periods, so many of the key players in conflicts, they don't all somehow manage to survive and reach a final huge culmination. Most of them just die of disease, just random things that a lot of we don't actually know how they died. And so it's often just who can survive the longest instead of who can win. And they're the victor just if they can manage to weave their way through these events and emerge at the end alive. And so when that's presented in kind of fantasy, I think it's awesome because, as I said earlier, there's such a range to fantasy where it's not necessary for an amazing book, but it's another layer you can add, which I think that can really elevate it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I agree with pretty much what everyone is saying, that stakes are important and knowing that characters won't make it is really important for pulling you in. But we've had Travis Baldry on the show as well, and Legends and Lattes, cozy fantasy is really taking off. So it's interesting to see there's a space for both, I think, out there. So like after you finish the end of The Hunger of the Gods, for example, you might be like, I need a minute. I need to read about some coffee and some scones, just take a breather.
Oh,
yeah. I think those
we
those
needed
really work together.
lattes straight after that.
We definitely did.
And I love the way that fantasy is going, like the direction it's going in now, in terms of there is so many different types of fantasy out there now, and it's never, we are definitely in the golden age of fantasy. I don't think the scope has ever been such a wide range of different books, different authors from different backgrounds, and I just love reading about, for everything. Like I read a book called Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, and the setting is a Mesoamerica fantastical setting, and it's just breathtakingly fresh, and I just love that fantasy nowadays, definitely.
Yeah, and the exploration of there's many different types of conflicts, aren't there? Like in Legends and Lattes, I was just begging for this coffee shop to work. I was like, come on, please let customers walk through the door, which I never in a fantasy book, but it's kind of it's genius, really, taking that kind of conflict, and it's not about is this character going to survive. It's about, is this business going to run? And it's I think it's quite integral in a book to have a conflict, whatever it is, and to have that kind of resonating with the reader and that they engage with, and it doesn't just have to be a huge battle. At times it can be, but it's a balance, isn't it? Where I think in all books, even books that are largely based on kind of that military action, you need those slower moments, don't you, where you're engaged with the characters and you have those conflict of relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. It comes back to exactly what we were all saying, is we're all character-based readers. So what do these epic fantasies military fantasies and legends and lattes have in common? You care about the characters and you want them to succeed, whether it's living or dying or getting someone to buy some damn coffee, right? So
I mean, and
in both
reading Legends and
cases.
Lattes, I was thinking I need one of these coffees because they love them, and I need one of them. I need those ingredients.
Mm-hmm. Faye had a comment here. The fact that we're getting different mythologies and cultures to inspire a fantasy, the fact that we have grimdark and cozy fantasy running parallel in popularity, and a peak in historical fantasy. Yes, all of that at once. It's pretty awesome to see.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
And I think historical fantasy seems to be even more on the rise, isn't it? Like last year with the Children of Gods and Fatima, and this year the Judas Blossom by Stephen Ryan coming out, and it seems there's going to be more and more, which is a huge plus for us, and we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, another one I have to get to, Stephen Aaron, who's been on the channel. Great, fantastic writer that I'm still, I've read The Coward, I have The Warrior on my shelf, still haven't gotten to it. And it's one of those okay, but yeah, and it does seem, as much as we see all these things about AI taking over writing and all these trends, it does very much feel, and I don't know if you all feel the same, that we are in somewhat a golden age of fantasy and sci-fi and writing. It does seem like it's almost like a mini renaissance of these genres, and especially with the like I said before, the proliferation of self-published fantasy really adding another dimension to the traditional works, and really complementing each other. And now again with Booktube, you see a lot of the popular booktubers, including yourselves. You hold up a traditionally published book, and here's a self-published book, and and who can tell the difference? And they're both books, and they're both great. They're published in different venues, but through different means. But it's there are so many great books, period, out there, and that is absolutely wonderful for all of us who love to write and who love to read. So that's a good thing.
Most definitely.
Yeah, definitely. And you've still got classic inspired fantasy like Ryan Cahill, who's also self-pubbed, and it's just fantastic. And I definitely agree, Pierre, we're in a golden age, and there's just so much to love out there. So if you don't enjoy one type of fantasy, go try another, and you still will enjoy fantasy as a genre.
And I think there's a lot more respect for fantasy now. Obviously, I'm a younger reader, but obviously I feel like fantasy struggled with having respect over the decades. But recently it feels like there's been a big change in that. And I think a big part of it is kind of that people understanding how broad fantasy is.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I don't want to keep you guys for too long. These always go so fast. We're coming up on an hour and a half here. But I always have, I know, right? Time flies when you're having fun.
Exactly.
But I always like to ask one final question of our guests when they're on my channel. And I'm obsessed with mythologies, origin stories, that kind of genre of work. And it makes me interested in that in people's lives as well. So I always like to ask people that we have on, is there any story that you think made you the reader or the writer that you are today? Now, when I say story, it doesn't have to be a book. It could be a video game that you enjoyed when you were younger. It could be a movie that you watched, a TV show, a comic book, any kind of story that you think, besides Papa Gwynn's books, that inspired you and kind of put you on the track to be the story lover that you are today.
Oh, that's so hard, isn't it? About kind of those formative reads, isn't it? Of course, it would be cheating to just say Papa Gwynne. That is a huge part. But I think it's hard. I think we've always been lovers of mythology, so that's a big part. But I'd say it's so hard to get it down to one, isn't it? I think Lord of the Rings, of course, it's a lot of people say it, but it's because it's true that Lord of the Rings really resonated, the films and the books as well. That's just actually enraptured me from when I was 5 or 6. I think I was 2 days old when I was in the cinema watching Two Towers. I don't remember it, but I was there.
It's good.
It was the first film I watched. So I think it's been with me since then. And Lord of the Rings is integral to kind of the reading experience for me.
Yeah, I think the Fellowship of the Ring, the film, for me came at a time in my life where I was obsessed with it. And when I say obsessed, I mean I was ridiculously obsessed. And I love slice of life, and sitting in the Shire would just be my absolute dream. So that was probably the biggest influence on me as a child. And I would also say The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander, that series, The Black Cauldron. It's a Welsh-inspired mythological fantasy with lots of similarities to Lord of the Rings. There's a kind of a weird, goblin-y creature called Gurgi, but he's got hair. There's a magic pig, and there's characters to root for. And as a young boy, I loved any kind of coming-of-age fantasy where you could be the hero of your own story, and I still will love that today because I'm very impressionable. So yeah,
and it's interesting drawing parallels, isn't it? Where we're still in it. That's still the things that we love: coming of age stories, character driven. But so the core kind of stays the same, I think, in a lot of ways. But then you kind of explore in others.
Yeah, wonderful. Lord Alexander, Crogs of the Pre, wonderful, beautiful book, The Black Cauldron. That's great stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, Lord Alexander, just so underrated. I'd love to do a reread of that soon. Yeah.
Looks like I have another one to add to my classic fantasy TBR. But you're not alone in your Lord of the Rings obsession. I wanted to be Legolas. I was going to be Legolas. I was determined. So you're not alone.
But I always wanted to be Frodo, and Dad even wrote me a message from Gandalf pretending I was Frodo, and he gave me a ring, and
that is so precious.
That touched that. Wow, that touched it. Wow.
He even got me the One Ring once, but we had a decking put in the garden and it fell down the cracks, so I could never invisible anymore. But maybe I'll get it back.
Maybe in 1,000 years, someone will find it.
Yeah, someone will grab it, right? The story begins again.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, this was a wonderful conversation. Yes. This was delightful. But before we go, if someone wasn't here before, or if they live under a rock on Booktube and they haven't heard of you, if you wouldn't mind telling people where they can find you, where they can look maybe for your books in the future, if you got any ideas for that, just where people can look to see your stuff.
So we've got a channel called The Brothers Gwynne, and I've got mine on my own, William Gwynne, but The Brothers Gwynne is far more entertaining. And then we're both on Twitter under our names, William Gwynne and Edward Gwynne. I'm on Instagram as well under The Wolf and Crow. And then we've both got a Goodreads page under our name. So we're all over. Anywhere you can talk books other than Reddit, that boggles me. I do not understand Reddit. But everything else, we're on there, aren't we?
Yeah, we'll be there, and we'll see you in the comments of all the different booktubers as well.
Wonderful. And what about you, PL? Where can people find you, my co-host?
Typically, you can find me beside you and Steve on Page Chewing, our wonderful feature where we interview fantastic creatives like Ed and Will. You can find Before We Go blog. Again, shout out to Beth Tabler, where I'm assistant editor Before We Go blog. So my reviews, Goodreads, of course. For the books, the John Kingdom Saga, www.plstore.com. 2 books out. John Kingdom and the Last of the Atalanteans, and book 3, Lord and King, will be premiering sometime in the next couple months. My preferred social media platform is Twitter. I'm definitely a Twitter lurker, not just a lurker. I'm out there on Twitter. So anything book related, business related, DM me. My DMs are open. I love engaging with people, talking about books, fantasy, literature, and that's at P.L. Stuart Writes. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, but really Twitter is where the best place to get a hold.
Brilliant.
Steve is not with us today. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go for it, Taylor.
Oh, okay. Steve is not with us today, but you can find him over on Steve Talks Books and Movies. He also has a movie channel now. But if you are somehow watching this and you don't know who I am, I'm Taylor. This is my channel, Made Between the Pages. You can find me here on Steve's channel whenever we do page chewing over there. Page chewing Friday conversations as well, which is much more casual. People often have drinks in their hands. It's a hoot. So that is also available. You can find me there. You can also find me on Twitter. My handle is always in the comments or the description, not the comments, the description box of all of the videos. And that's mostly where I talk about books. Goodreads as well. You can find me there. And Before We Go blog. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming by in the comments, and everyone who's here live now or watching afterwards. Thanks for tuning in. And a great big thank you to the Brothers Gwynne, Ed and Will, for joining us.
Thank you, Taylor. Yeah. Thank you, PL. It's been an absolute highlight of our year so far on Booktube. So thank you so much. We've absolutely loved it. And we'd love to have you guys on our channel in the future as well. So, yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
consider it done.
We would love to. We'd be so honored. Thank you.
And Steve can come next time if he wants.
Yeah, we'll
No,
find them.
We'll allow it. We'll allow it.
This one said.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on. It's been so much fun talking about books, and I've loved these questions. And it's thought-provoking as well, kind of thinking about this, what drives us to read, and what we love about reading. That's what it all boils down to, isn't it?
Yeah, and thank you to everyone who was commenting and watching today. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you for the comments.
Yes, 100%. The chat makes it 10 times better. So, all right. Well, we're going to sign off for now, but we'll see everyone on the screen soon. But thanks for coming by, everyone. See you.
Bye.
Bye.